Hello, everyone. This is Ernie Humphrey, the CEO of Treasury Webinars. Pleased to welcome you to our session today, session that's near and dear to my heart, the new 2020 AFP Service Codes, what it means for you and your banks. Back in the day, I used to manage the AFP Service Codes many moons ago, and I had the opportunity to meet Bridget Meyer, and she is absolutely the world expert on the service codes, and she let me know that we had an update. And I said, wow, that's really important. I think we need to inform our Treasury and Finance colleagues there of this incredibly important topic. So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and hand the floor to Bridget. It's going to be hard for me not to talk the whole time, but I'll do my best. Bridget, I'd like to welcome you to the session. Why don't you give us a little bit about your background, then let's dive in.
Absolutely, Ernie. I'm so glad that you reached out. I think, you and I got to work together back in the day when we were managing AFP service codes. And so I've been working with AFP now as in some way, shape or form around AFP codes since 2001. So when it comes back about AFP codes, there's a lot I don't know, or I should say that the other way around. There isn't much I don't know. And so I started out as a Treasury practitioner for the government, for the IRS, did my first introduction to AFP service codes and trying to launch an RFP. And as a young Treasury analyst, trying to wrap my head around what all these Treasury services meant. We had 5 different banks. Everybody was calling services differently. I didn't understand everything that was going on. I was handed this book. And back then it was a TMA code book, and now it's the AFP Service Codes book, which was really a Bible of all that is cash management and how banks charge their largest companies and clients. And I think it's a resource that I think is underutilized in a training material, but really started my journey into Treasury. So when we look at, so today, thank you for the invitation. I'm going to just do a brief overview of what AFP service codes are. I think, just make sure everybody's aware what they are, why they even matter, and then dive into the overview of the 2020 changes to the US AFP code set and what that will mean for the corporate community as well as the banking community, and how they can apply those changes. So, in case you didn't know, the AFP service codes have been around since the late 80s and are really, they're not BAI codes. They're not on information reporting or have anything to do with payments. This is a billing code that appears on account analysis statements in the US or in electronic bills for banking services internationally. So they have been updated, as you can kind of see in the dates, about every 5 years or so, and then on the alternating cycle with the global codes that we published in 2012. So yes, there are 2 different code sets, and I think that's really important for a corporate to understand because they're designed for file formats, really. So the AFP original code set was designed for the EDI 822, and it's a mandatory field in that file format. It is 6 digits. And then when it came to the ISO adoption and creating this international standard for bank fee reporting, that's when AFP was approached to say, hey, this code set was really very US centric and doesn't have the right terminology, and there's so detailed, can we have a different set that would apply to the international community? So that's where we created an 8-digit code with a 3-digit alpha there at the very bottom. You can kind of see at the screen kind of the 2 different versions to kind of make it a little bit easier to understand. But what matters most to a corporate is if you have an international presence and you work with international banks and US banks, and you're all getting electronic files and you have a software and you think all of your problems are solved, the challenge with that is you are going to have to manage those 2 different code sets, and your software provider is going to have to help you with that. And to be able to make sure that you can kind of roll those up. So it's an important question to ask. But today, what we're talking about from a code set, what we just updated is just the US code set. If you are like most Americans, we get our PDF statements that we just love, that we can download instantly from our online banking portals. Just wanted to give a quick screenshot so people understand. Probably never even looked at those codes before, but that's the codes that we're talking about today. They are found in CSVs, like I said, in EDI 822s. So they're there to help you as a corporate benchmark, do cross-bank comparisons, help you in initiating the RFP pricing schedule, and perform analytics on your treasury spend. So they're really critical. Any software cannot use descriptions provided from banks on a PDF statement to do analytics. So in this data generation that we're in, where everything is Power BI and Tableau and all these cool software that's out there that try to help us play with and understand our data, bank fee data tells you a wealth of information about your organization. And it really can be leveraged for many, many different things. I would just caution you, because of the accuracy of the code assignments. It's well known over the years that banks haven't paid a lot of attention to these. It's a mandatory field. They slap something in there. They don't always pay the best attention to that code mapping. So just be prepared that if you're not working with an AFP accredited provider, then chances are you're going to have to do some remapping for the bank. So just to let you know, why these service codes matter, if you haven't figured it out already, if you want to do data analytics, if you want to do an RFP pricing schedule, cross-bank comparisons, benchmarking, cost per item analysis, that is all going to be improved with better bank data mapping. And what we were finding with the old code set is that there were so many gaps. Every time we tried to map something, we didn't have a place to put it. And that was impacting benchmarking, impacting all of the models that we were trying to build as we were trying to figure out ways to accommodate for that. So one last example here to kind of show you, this is just the same bank, and how a simple service like debit credit posting can be called so many different things, even within the same bank. And so proper data classification is the key to understanding your data. You got to know what it means before you can benchmark it, ask for a price for it, and then you have to be able to make sure that you can communicate that to your bank when receiving proposals, et cetera. So we kind of did a test with one of our task force members where she had all of her things, all of her services mapped, and then I had it all mapped on my side, and there was a 57% difference in AFP code assignment. That is huge, especially if we were both going to be issuing the exact same pricing, like a pricing schedule for those exact same services, and the bank on the other side is trying to quote those. What could be lost in those translations and the impact of that to your bottom line it was just really startling when we realized that. So if you're not doing bank fee analysis, if you're not paying attention to your AFP service codes, you're missing out on being able to do easy budgeting, cost allocation. The sky's the limit, really understanding cost of payments. And what I think is really important is that as the Treasury departments, they are the heart of an organization. And I feel like, this is an opportunity for you, if you really understand this Treasury data, for you to strengthen those business unit relationships and your bank relationships. But it's really the idea that you can help and assist AP and AR with their initiatives and leverage this data to build your metrics and ROI on implementing Treasury software, or have you as an individual become that superhero or that central hub where people go for information to say, hey, I'm thinking about implementing this payable software. I need to know what that impact would be on my bank fees. Could you help me out with that? You become that central resource within the organization. So that's my overview on AFP codes. So if I haven't convinced you already, I encourage you to pay attention to bank fees, and it's a subject I never tire of, and I've been doing it for 20 years, and I'll keep doing it for 20 more, I hope. But let's dive into the overview of the 2020 update. So as the world was shutting down, literally our first task force meeting was March 15th of 2020. And we had assembled the troops. We had 20 different individuals, bankers, corporates, software vendors, and we were kicking off the project to do a deep dive into the 2013 version of AFP Service Codes and get them updated to today's Treasury environment. So that was we had an 8-week turnaround to try to accomplish this mission. And while everybody was adjusting to working from home and dealing with PPI loans the bankers were trying to deal with, we were still driving forward in trying to do this update because we really felt it was so important. So within this code, I mean, this is like the overview here, but only 32% we left untouched. Out of 2,800, that's a lot. That was a lot of work, a lot of changes. And we got rid of almost a third of the code set, because when you look at the global code set had about 900 service codes. The US code had 2,800. We were like, guys, we got to bring this down to be a little bit more comparable. Maybe we don't need to be in as much detail as we were before. And so we modified descriptions, we changed things to be in today's environment. And the biggest changes you need to know about is that we added some new product families. And those are, one for trade finance. There are banks that are out there that use AFP codes and reporting and including some trade finance fees in their electronic fee reporting. We also added a whole new one for integrated services, integrated payables, integrated receivables, needed a home. We didn't know where they should go. This is like 2013, we didn't even know what that was, right? They were kind of in the EDI family-ish. And so we decided they needed their own little place. And along that with AR matching and all of the services that were going along with it that are a part of those services. Instant payments, we needed a place for RTP transactions, instant payments. So we added all of those into the funds transfer section and managed how is this going to happen as we have more, anticipate even more and more different types of domestic and international real-time transactions. And how is that going to relate with wires and chips and Fedwire and ACH. So that's been all addressed in this new code set. And imaging, I think, is another area within Treasury that has, in banking, where the banks they've really changed the way they're charging. They charge you to take a picture of anything, to send that picture to you. You can pay for the same image 4 different ways. And I think we needed to look at how those were reflected across all of the product groups. And the other thing that was really a trend that we saw was this blending and blurring of lines across product families. So banks starting to charge for transmission services regardless of what information's in the file. They don't care if it's a positive pay file or a daily reporting file. And that was really causing issues with mapping. So we added, on the imaging side, we're seeing that cross-pollination of products where you pay for one image maintenance portal and with nothing, it could be a lockbox image or it could be a checks paid image. Didn't know how to deal with those. So that's all been addressed. And APIs, we're hearing banks are constantly pitching APIs. And so we clarified in the new code set how those services should be mapped and related to transmission services as well. So this chart here just kind of gives you a snapshot of all the product families within the US code set and the changes that were made. So just going to point out a few things. The 10 depository services is the largest. It's the biggest, longest bar, over 300 service codes just in that one section. When you look at lockbox and depository services, that's just to do deposits. I mean, you've got almost 550 service codes traditionally, and it's kind of an old school thing, right? It's a deposit. But we got rid of some, we added a few new, and we modified and clarified, because even image cash letter services and some distinctions between remote deposit, cash vault services, all of that had to be clarified within that to today's environment, smart safes, et cetera. So the other thing I wanted to point out was in the 40 information services down here, it's a giant red bar. And that means we got rid of a ton of information services because the banks don't care anymore. They don't charge you separately for summary versus detail or global versus domestic. If it's an online banking, we're receiving something via transmission or online banking, we're going to assume it's going to be the same whether it's global or domestic now in today's market. So we really cleaned up information reporting and also the custody services. So we met with some different experts in the field on some of these lesser used product families and made significant changes, because there are some banks now that are starting to provide 822s for custody services. And I think that's great. I think, what I've seen from the large corporates that I work with is ultimately they would, in their dream world, if we could all dream, they would want to be able to receive electronic banking reporting for all of their wallet spend at the banks. and have it all in the same file so that they're not just looking at cash management, but they'd like to just be able to see, I want to see my whole wallet. What did I spend to my banks across different treasury products and services? So if you're a banker out there, you need to be hearing this message that that's the ideal dream world that your large corporates really would like to see. This slide here just kind of walks you through a few more of the changes that we made in the industry, because each change that I'm talking about is really a change in the treasury, in cash management industry that has happened in the last 5 years. And so if any of these things don't sound familiar to you, you might be missing the boat. So just within account services, a general account, we added a lot of new codes for account validation, which is a new big thing for fraud validation too. We talked about multi-product imaging and transmission, APIs. We also included codes for artificial intelligence services, for mobile services, mobile authorizations, et cetera, because I think it's just really important that we're prepared for the future. It may be a couple more years before we update these code sets again, and we want to make sure that that we're poised and ready. We have some placeholders as we've already, for those that we already know banks are moving in that direction. Within Lockbox, a traditional plain Jane service that we all think is dying, healthcare receivables is on the rise. I mean, there's some really interesting changes between this migration of traditional paper and electronic payments coming in, being matched, and didn't really have a great way to handle that in the previous code set. We see banks moving to multi-DDA lockboxes to help make them more affordable and keep these boxes in-house. As check volumes die, we see more of that. AR matching within lockboxes as well. We added a bunch of codes for that. So traditional, between lockbox, and now we have ACH services. In the ACH world, I guess, and I remember these days, it used to matter what kind of format the ACH was, right? PPD, CCD plus, blah, 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 blah. And so there was a bunch of codes in there that nobody was really using anymore. So we cleaned that up. We also brought in concentration services, because we could imagine a day where we don't just use the ACH network anymore to do concentration of funds, right? We could be doing this with real-time transactions instead. And so we wanted to make that more generic and broaden that to be prepared for other types of payment types. The reporting, I think reporting in general across the different areas, we've seen a giant shift of all the banks not really caring as much about what's on the report, but rather charging for the different types of delivery methods. So if you, where we used to have a lot of would matter with an activity report versus this kind of report, and you had all of that legacy stuff in there. Now it's like, do you want this online? You want it by file? You want it in a CD-ROM, or you want it in paper? And then pretty much across all the product areas, that's what the banks have all shifted to. So we wanted to make that shift in the code set as well. And then, even check services, paper disbursement, recon, you've got everybody outsourcing their printing of checks nowadays. So we wanted to take a look at that, clean that up. Nobody's getting any physical checks returned. We needed to clean some of that out of there. And then these combinations of fraud and recon services, payee, positive pay, with full recon, with partial recon, with standard recon, with all of these different things that banks are trying to come up with unique combinations and packages to try to, for these costs of checks. So we wanted to, make sure we could handle all of that within the code set, because otherwise you're benchmarking apples to oranges and packages to individual services, and that's very difficult in a model. So talked about wires and the RTP codes being added and being prepared for electronic payments and the death of EDI services. Not that EDI is going away. I mean, banks are still using EDI formatted files. It's just now they have a home in the integrated services section. And so that's an important shift there. I would say that the changing payment landscape, and even as we were doing this in April and May of 2020, we had no idea even how fast that would evolve, just even from that point to today, right? And how quickly the world changed. And so we were already anticipating that. There was a lot of confusion. And I couldn't even, electronic lockbox means something very different to different organizations. So we went on a quest to try to actually define these services, because there was so much confusion even within the task force to say, well, at my bank we call electronic lockbox this, and at my bank we call it that. And so we wanted to clarify what is electronic bill pay and presentment versus electronic lockbox. And so again, AFP setting the rules, if you will, and setting the kind of the Webster's dictionary for what are these services going to be called in the Treasury community going forward. And so the key distinction here from an electronic, what do we consider EBPP, right, versus an EBIP, and it's like for a young Treasury analyst, they have no idea, right? It's just so confusing. So we wanted to make sure that bill pay aggregation versus an actual website or app that somebody's going to and you're collecting payments, where's the consumer going? Where are they going to make their payment? And that's really drawing the lines between that so that we can really clarify the two products on that, and payments, receiving of payments going forward. So throughout this process, I mean, that's just kind of the overview. I don't want to go too far into details because there was just so many changes, but I think that should give you a taste of how the industry has shifted, how the code set is now definitely more relative. We did meet with subject matter experts in retained assets, debt and credit, custody services, payment cards. All of this has been updated in this code set in the hopes that as this industry continues to evolve, that there is already an industry standard code set available for these vendors to start using to help build that share of wallet, as we talked about fintechs and others playing in the space, to point them to this AFP 2020 code set as a rule book or playbook for them to be able to understand how the market should be charging for these services. And amongst all the products and in that area, we did add more direction. We gave examples even in some cases, like, and gave much more help to those who are trying to do the mapping to give them, there's so many areas where it could be it's not quite so black and white, and it can be a gray area for mapping. So the task force really tried to give more examples, more descriptions, more clarity as to what we really mean belongs in this AFP service code. We paid attention to consistency across all products and across the global set to the US set, because we are conscious of these corporates that are receiving file types from different versions and different, from the different banks, and trying to make that logic a little bit more simple across the globe. So what does all this mean to you? And so I hope that I've convinced you that you need to pay attention to your bank fees and leverage this data in some sort of way. The AFP codes are there to help you understand these services, but the biggest challenge is getting the banks to move, right? We've seen this time and time for every adoption of every new thing and every new version of the AFP service codes. If the banks don't update soon, it's going to be a very confusing market. If you try to issue an RFP today using the AFP 2020s, where we've already got all of the AFP accredited banks starting to use the 2020s, and some of these other banks not updating until perhaps spring of 2022, that's going to get very confusing for you as a corporate and for the banks as well. Because if you issue this, that sales officer at the bank is going to look at in their billing system and say, I don't even have this AFP code. What are you talking about? We don't have anything starts with a 33, and they're not going to know what to do. And so I think that the sooner we really get the banks on board to adopt this new AFP 2020 version, the better for everyone. Any analytics that you try to do, it's going to eliminate the confusion. And so during this adoption period, please, please, please ask your banks what their plan is to become, just to either become accredited and upgrade to the AFP 2020s to make your life a lot easier. So the key takeaways I hope you have today is ask your banks to upgrade to the AFP 2020 and get accredited. If you're not receiving electronic billing files with these codes in them, ask for it. If you ever think you're going to do a bank fee project in the future, ask now so that you can have all of the data and all the months and historical data for you to do your projects when you get there. you're going to need a software provider to get EDI files. So, but also ask and make a plan for how you're going to classify that data. Don't just rely on the banks to do a good job. You need to be prepared to make sure that either your software vendor is going to help you. Like, I know that's something that we at Redbridge we take on for our clients, or that you have a plan to do that internally yourself. But ultimately, I think you can gain better visibility, better reporting, and better control of your treasury organization with this new AFP 2020 service codes.
All right, thank you so much for that valuable information. I just remembered how much I don't know about the service codes. So thank you. You are a steward. I have to bow to you to get all these global banks to collaborate with each other. I could spend hours talking about this with you, but you know what? We're going to have to do a webinar together and do like a full hour. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions. So thank you so much, Bridget, for taking the time to share your amazing expertise with us. Seriously, folks, this is the world expert on the AFP service code. So we are honored to have Bridget with us. And we are also honored to have our friends at Redbridge in our virtual exhibit hall. So please go and visit their booth, and you might be able to meet the man who calls himself the superhero of service codes, Dan Gill, but Bridget's my favorite superhero. So as always, everyone, if you knock on my door, I'll answer it. Make the rest of your day great, everyone.